I wonder if she saw the last email that Lindsay sent to her. Perhaps she missed, I don't know, maybe she's trying to connect through the old
She should have received an email as a panelist. That shouldn't be a problem. And our website is working again.
Oh, it is? Okay, great.
Yeah. I'll work on my lighting for tonight. What's the dog's name again, Clifford? What was the dog's name again?
Oh, his name is Augie.
Augie, okay. Yeah. Okay, we could wait for the chair for a few minutes, or we could.
Sorry, she's just contacted me for the link again. So if you just want to give it one.
Okay, good.
I sent her a text. She said she needed the invite.
Good afternoon, Council and committee members.
Good afternoon.
Hope we're having a good day.
So far.
Leave you to it.
Hi, folks. Sorry about that. Oh. Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Sorry about that. I was having login issues there. All right. So it's 3:01, so I should definitely get this meeting started, eh? So I'd like to call this Planning and Development Committee meeting to order. Can I get a motion to accept the agenda, please? Councillor Crowell, Councillor Deone. We're moving on to the first agenda, the first report.
All in favor?
Oh, sorry. Yes, all in favor? Everyone? Thank you. All right, moving on to the first report on the agenda, moving over to the Director of Infrastructure, Mr. Newman.
Thank you, Councillor Ludwig. So we've at last got something in front of you for a tree bylaw, and I was going to share share my screen, and hopefully that'll work. Okay. All right. So can everybody see my screen? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Good. So this is a tree preservation bylaw for council's consideration, and I'll just swing straight into it here. Oh, except, oh, there we go. I'm going to actually start off with the recommendations so I can explain a bit of what we're looking for here. Move that so you can see it better. So staff are seeking that this bylaw hopefully could be adopted during the month of July. And we've heard that, well, initially there was an intent to have a committee to be discussing this, and staff and maybe council as well has heard perhaps still some interest in the public in being involved. And what staff would like to do is have the bylaw adopted and have us be able to start using it as a tool. And still, if council wish to have a committee discuss it, suggest amendments, revisions, what have you, then they could still do so. Also, as a staff member who've been involved in new bylaws, often, I mean, we sit down, we think about the bylaw and the implications of it, and the what ifs, and we don't always think of every scenario, or you know, we sometimes find a complication when we start applying a bylaw. And this is our first crack at an overarching tree preservation bylaw, and so I'm anticipating that staff on their own would be coming back to council regardless, with some proposed amendments after we've begun using it. And I'm thinking that in order to give us tools to start working with now, if council is willing to adopt the bylaw, and then staff would report back in, and I'm suggesting Q4 with our experiences with the bylaw and the feedback that we get from developers, and the challenges we may have had or the successes. And then if council still wanted to involve the public on this, it will be an opportunity for the public as well to use the bylaw and provide any comment or suggestions, recommendations, etc. And furthermore, this is a step in managing our forests in general. And we would also have these other three recommendations that would come out of that, amending our subdivision and development servicing bylaw, furthering the national healing forest idea as part of White Tower Pond expansion, and providing a report detailing the next step in establishing an urban forest master strategic plan. I'm going to move on from there and into the bylaw and the background now. So we have a tree cutting permit bylaw, 623, very, very limited in scope. It's got some land identified over near Block 7 of Gospel Rock. We've got the policy 6.1, tree removal on public land. And because of our strides that we've made in natural asset management, the current policy is out of step with current council objectives. We had the integrated stormwater management plan that was adopted by council, and in that plan they included the recommendation for a tree preservation bylaw. As mentioned, there was a desire about a year ago for a committee to be formed for tree preservation. And you know how busy we all get with or without COVID, and that hasn't happened yet. And we've been a year without any sort of regulation in this area. And so we're now presenting you with the tree preservation bylaw that, as I say, hoping to be adopted by the end of July, and with some potential amendments and an opportunity for input from public if desired. Before I go any further on this, you may have seen another name on the screen, Michelle Lewis, and she's one of our resident experts in the Parks Department, and she's done the lion's share of work on this. I worked with her on developing this bylaw, but as I say, she's done all the research and the bulk of the writing of the bylaw, and is quite passionate about trees in general, whether they're part of a bylaw or not. And I'll ask her to be speaking to a couple of these slides a little bit further on, and she'll also be available for questions if council has any. So the function of trees goes far beyond what was mentioned in the ISMP, the Integrated Stormwater Management Plan. We were more concerned, of course, with stormwater quantity and quality. So the removal of trees decreases the quality of the water by removing that filter, and can lead to erosion as well. But it combats climate change, and they will have a greater role to be playing as climate change progresses, it will be a more significant role, and we need to be looking forward to what our plans are for trees in our community. As mentioned, they protect from erosion. If you've got a tree that's rooted in the bank, and that tree is removed, that can lead to the erosion of our slopes, and we do have a reasonable number of slopes around here. It reduces what's called the heat island effect, which is increase in the temperature of the air above towns and cities because of the loss of vegetation. It creates an attractive place to live, provides habitat. Stormwater retention is mentioned. They clean our air, and there's scientific studies that have shown, and I've experienced it myself, with providing mental and physical health benefits from just being around trees and being in the forest. And that's what I call my church, is on the weekend going out into the forest and experiencing that. It's part of a system. The trees that we have are part of a system, and we've been talking about foreshore protection, and it's very difficult to pull one aspect of our natural assets out and examine it on its own without looking at the upstream, so to speak, and downstream effects of that asset. And then there's also been studies to show that trees actually improve property values, which of course is beneficial for the town as well. So moving to the bylaw itself, I got to talk to Leslie Ann about getting some hints on how to run a PowerPoint while talking on Zoom. So this is actually the first step in urban forest planning. And the urban forest means that trees, forests, green space, and related, Michelle, I'm gonna screw up this, abiotic and biotic and cultural components located within the town. When you look at the benefits that they provide to the town as a whole, they're a community asset, whether they're on private property or public. And I think that's maybe a little bit of a difficult concept for people to wrap their heads around. But what can happen on somebody's land, and I think probably the biggest impact is going to be development sites. And the first thing invariably that happens is to clear the trees on that and make way for the civil works. But by doing that, that is impacting all those benefits of the trees that I mentioned, and we need to carefully consider how we are allowing development to progress in the town, so as to make sure that we're maintaining as much of that asset as possible, and countering that asset whenever, or countering the removal of that asset wherever possible. And as mentioned, they are going to increase in importance as climate change progresses. And I've always thought of the urban forest as forests that are in an urban environment, of course. However, with this definition, it also means trees that are located in the road dedication, within our parks, whether they are part of what would be deemed a forest or more individual. As mentioned, the tree bylaw covers both private and public property. And we have seen the effect recently of, well, just in the past year, which is another reason why I would like to see this bylaw adopted sooner rather than later, is 3 significant trees removed on public land, 1 on private property, and block 7 in the development site area was clear cut. And all of that was permitted under the lack of bylaw that we have. Not to say that these trees wouldn't have necessarily been removed, but at least it would have been done with a knowledge of what we're doing and following a thought out bylaw and process. The bylaw will also make provision for replacement trees. And so if trees are removed of a certain species, then there's a provision for replanting replacement trees in areas of the town or on private property to offset the removal of those trees. And lastly, on this slide anyway, is that the lack of clear legislation and policy have caused increased demands and stress on council and staff. The bylaw provides an identification of protected trees, which are all native to this area. I won't bother reading all these out. You can scan through them. No surprises on any of them, I would suspect. However, not every tree around here is listed on there. Using, for example, an alder. An alder isn't a protected tree just by its type of species that it is. But these trees are recommended as being the trees that are to be protected. And when we say protected, there is a process to go through as to whether they are or can be removed or not on public or private property. It doesn't mean to say that they are protected to the point where you cannot remove them, period. Not like a protected bird or what have you. There is just a process to go through and certain conditions that would need to be met if any of those trees are to be removed. The tree bylaw that you have there in front of you, it establishes a permitting process and protection, tree protection practices, and an example of some of those practices you can see at the supportive housing site where those trees have been neatly fenced and protected from construction. And in fact, we had an arborist on site that was overseeing the excavation of the on the property next to the trees. And then there's also, as I mentioned, a requirement and specifications for replacement trees and a list of replacement trees based on different conditions, whether it's dry, wet, whether we're looking for something more columnar, smaller, medium, etc. And so we have this tree bylaw has all the tools that staff need to be administering this. I'm going to pass this over to Michelle just to speak on the next two slides if she is there.
Hello.
There she is.
So when looking at an urban forest plan for the town, we see it as a guiding document that would inform staff and council. And one of the benefits would be to understand better what we're working with and how to make steps moving forward. When Dave and I began talking about how to increase the tree canopy cover within the town, we realized that to begin with, we would need to do a tree inventory. So we knew what our canopy cover was at, and that would help us make decisions on replacement trees and I apologize. This is my first time speaking to mayor and council, so.
Good fine, Michelle.
Thanks, Mayor Beamish. And so this guiding document, having an urban forest plan, would highlight where the gaps are and help us make decisions for all of the trees, public, private, and it would increase work efficiency for the park staff, and it could enhance emergency preparedness and essentially justify a municipal forestry budget. The As far as improvement in community relations, I think for us to have the educational element to the urban forest plan where there's community involvement, that would go a long way to feel like that everybody had a say. And so I think, Dave, could you move to the next slide?
Yeah, I was just gonna make one comment about this. Having these tools in place, we're always looking for synergies of projects and so on. And so one of the projects, for example, that we've got on our list this year is to fly the town and update our aerial photographs. And we use that in planning and bylaw enforcement, in engineering, and it's part of our GIS. And it's helpful to have, we do that roughly every 4 years, and then you can see the changes that happened. You can also see whether or not that addition existed in 2016 or not, where property lines are and so on. And we were talking about the coastal asset, can't remember what it's called now, but anyway, we're looking at our foreshore as our natural asset. And one of the things that we were discussing is the what's called LiDAR data, which will provide better topography and details on the ground. And so knowing that we're doing this forestry plan as well, we've actually got another aspect that we need to do this to do the tree inventory, is to fly the town and get the tree inventory. And so we've got all these projects that we can roll together and fly the town once, basically, because we know that we need it. And so having these tools in place, like the bylaw, we can look for those opportunities for being as efficient as we can with the limited dollars that we have. And so that that tree inventory, it's not a count of every single tree. And no, we're not going to give, or staff have no intention of giving names and serial numbers and phone numbers and email addresses to everyone. It is more looking at the overall canopy of the town, and establishing what our target, TDT, we call it, the target tree, no, TDD, target tree density. I still screwed it up, didn't I? So what is the density that we're looking for? And we will be able to see over time. We'll have a baseline for what our tree canopy is. We'll have a decision on council as to whether they want to stay with that cover, improve that cover, or allow a decrease. And next time we fly, we will be able to look at what these measures are that council has put into place to determine whether we're being successful or not, and have something that is actually measurable. So that's going to be a great tool for both council and staff, and is typical of a process to do with natural asset management. So I'm going to ask Michelle to speak to this one as well.
Okay, I had a look at the National Healing Forest. Thank you, Councillor Crowell, for sharing that with us. And I do believe that it's an opportunity for us to further our relations with the Squamish Nation. And my concerns would be that if we don't have an established framework for tying into the calls to action from the TRC and UNDRIP, then I'm not sure if this would be a missed opportunity to further those relationships. And Dave, did you want to speak more to that?
No, I think you got that one okay. Yep.
Okay.
The slider to that point, Michelle.
That point.
Yeah, no, I'm good.
Okay. And I do believe that I think it's a great initiative, and Councillor Crowell, I've heard you speak to it before, and yes, it would be the first of its kind in BC. And also the great thing about that program is that there's no parameters surrounding it. So it could be as simple as planting a single tree. It could be preserving a forest. It could be opportunities for educational components to an existing forest. And so I believe that there's an opportunity to move forward with this in a culturally sensitive manner, and I support it fully.
The pending White Tower Park pond construction is also an opportunity here now that we've got a clear vision as to what will be happening in upstream of White Tower Park as far as stormwater management. As you know, we've got that, have that on the budget for a while, and I've been waiting for grant approval on that. And we see that as a very neat opportunity actually to expand a forest, expand a wooded area rather than cutting into it, which so often happens as a community develops, and seeking out how we can put educational components in there about the First Peoples who were around here and what significance they would have had on that particular area, and possibly some plantings or culturally significant trees or vegetation that so it's quite an exciting opportunity to tie that into an overall plan. Anything else on that, Michelle, that you want to speak to? Okay, thank you. So we have also been steadily pecking away at subdivision bylaw amendment that covers the stormwater aspect of the integrated stormwater management plan. We would make some changes to be consistent with the tree bylaw, such as the planting standards and tree species lists, and make sure that we're being consistent between the two bylaws. One of the items that we've been discussing is the challenge that we have with 20-meter road dedications to put in trees of any significance. We do have our street trees, which tend to be smaller trees and do provide a visual aspect of a development. However, we don't have room for fir trees or maple trees or some of these other native species that may have been removed as part of that development. And we've got another stormwater structure going in up at Parkland Phase 4. And one of the things that we're asking them to do is to be incorporating plantings that were taken out of the development, it's more the type as opposed to the actual plants themselves, but the types of plants, and make sure that they are planted in that same area again. And having wider road dedications would give us an opportunity to put some larger trees in that have a far bigger effect on combating climate change, providing stormwater retention, all those benefits that we talked about. The small street trees that we put in, yes, they provide some benefit. However, not near as much as our native trees do, and not near as much as the size of tree. And so it's far better to put in a single large tree than several small trees as far as the benefit to them. And one of the things I notice sometimes from some development is you look across them, if you can get a slight elevation, maybe about roof line, and they're two-dimensional. You know, there's nothing poking above the roofs of the houses. And you look at others where they are you know, perhaps older, may have some park or whatever, and you can see these larger trees, and it adds a much in my opinion anyway, a much more appealing development, and can provide that habitat that has been lost, and can provide connection with for the residents to those natural assets. What we're thinking as far as a wider road dedications, and we're not going to immediately go to that. I just want to really gauge councils and committees appetite for that, is that we typically have a 20-meter road dedication, which allows for these small trees to be planted. A lot of times what we're doing is we're actually battling what is below us as well, as far as buried infrastructure. And 20 meters, when you combine that with the road, with the sidewalks, we use up that 20 meters pretty quickly. And so one of the things that we're looking at is a 25-meter road dedication, which will affect development potential. And we do have some numbers for that if council is interested in exploring that a little bit further. And I wanted to bring that to you at this point to give you an idea on some of the thoughts that we've got, and to bring back for us staff to bring back something that is consistent with council's objectives. An example of a 25-meter right-of-way is Glassford Road. I don't know if anyone lives in that neck of the woods, but if you drive down there, it's very, very, very wide. And that actually leads to increased vehicle speed as well. And so there you can, as I say, you can see how wide that is, and it's not ridiculously wide, but it's there, and there is additional room. In other places, right opposite IGA Mall, and there's a triangular section of property, and most of that is an extra 5 meters width of road dedication. And staff have been looking at that location on the road dedication to be able to plant some replacement trees. I don't know if you recall, but we were looking to where to plant some replacement trees that were required of somebody that removed some trees on town property. And that would be an ideal place to showcase that, and to showcase what a infrastructure and development could look like with more of a focus on nature. That, as you know, it is consistent with your strategic plan. Hang on a minute, I'm just going to get more of this in view. Sorry about that.
I just want to comment on the time. We just want to watch the time a bit here.
Yep, I got this one and one other slide to go.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. So it is responding to a changing climate. We have had a legal review of the bylaw, and we do have some additional funded towards some initial work on the urban forest. And then we're proposing to report back on the addition of any fees and charges related to the tree preservation bylaw, should council wish to move towards adoption in July. And then the bylaw is consistent with the OCP asset management policy and eco asset strategy. And lastly, there are the recommendations that are in staff's report, and Michelle and I are happy to take any questions that you might have.
Great, thank you very much to both of you, Dave and Michelle. That was great. Can I get a motion to receive the report, please? Mayor Beamish, I don't have everyone on my screen right now. Councillor Deone, thank you. All in favor? Thank you. I'm assuming everyone's hands up. Dave, if we could maybe remove, I'm sure you're working on it, but if you could remove the recommendation so I could get everybody else back on the screen.
Sure.
Thank you.
There you go.
Yeah, thank you very much. Okay, open for discussion. Councillor Crowell.
Thank you, Chair. I feel like it's Christmas Day and we've just been given a wonderful present. And I'd really like to thank Dave and Michelle for everything they've done. I've been sort of sending little text messages across the country to Ottawa, just to say that, you know, the healing forest potential is on our agenda today, which is, you know, great news. I don't think, you know, the healing forest component of it is great. The First Nations people and the trees were here long before us, and It affords us a unique opportunity, as you mentioned, Michelle, to preserve some of that. And the fact that we can incorporate it into our natural asset and our stormwater management system, it just seems, an absolute no-brainer that it would allow us the unique opportunity of creating a healing forest in this part of the country, the first in BC, as you mentioned. And it works sort of hand in glove with reconciliation, what we'd like to see for the community as far as strategic plan, and protecting our sort of in a way almost showcasing our stormwater management system. And sort of further to that, which I find really significant, is we're putting in the affordable housing on sort of O'Shea. We have the Christensen Village there. And what is really quite unique about the White Tower Park is it's wheelchair accessible. And, it's something that we really should showcase, that, people, residents of Christensen Village, whether they can get out in their own wheelchairs or with assistance get out, it offers them an amazing opportunity. And I think it would, and to make it is a healing forest. It is. And I think, we have the unique opportunity to be able to showcase that. And I really commend you for highlighting it in this report. And thank you. I've got some other questions, but I'll let other people speak.
Thank you, Councillor Crowell. Do others have comments about the bylaw? Councillor D'Andrade?
Well, thank you, staff. I'm really pleased to see the tree bylaw. It was quite comprehensive. I think you guys did an excellent job. Pretty bold, but I like bold. I think I love also the conversation of widening roads. I'm sure there will be complication in some cases, but I like the idea because our development framework has been really, coming up and destroying nature or just going over thinking. And I think it's time to go the other way around when you talk about the functions of native trees. Yes, no comparison. So I think it's a great move. I would totally support that. Few questions with the bylaw. Maybe I'll ask questions and maybe we get, I'll ask some questions, and then I'm interested in understanding the strategy for engaging the public and getting feedback. I'm also trying to understand, maybe, I read, maybe it's not too clear to me, when you have a dead tree, I understand that if it's considered a hazard trees, I won't need to pay a fee, but what is the process, right? The tree, how fast is that or something like that? It's not clear to me. I also did not see any fee schedule, so yeah, I don't know. Yeah. And one more thing, there was a definition, two definitions that didn't get into the bylaw, which is important, is a specimen tree and significant trees. Because you cite at the, and actually on page 14, when you, I think it's letter F, when you have a paragraph that you say, for any subdivision and development, every cutting or removal of a protected tree, specimen tree or significant tree, shall comply with, and every tree permit issue under the bylaw is shall, I think is R, and shall be. That's just a typo, but it's just I picked, so I'm passing this. Yeah. Thank you.
Now, would you like me to just quickly go through the answers or comments on those ones?
Sure, if you can run through.
Okay, so engaging the public, that's really, I was going to leave that with council, although obviously staff would be happy to present it with something perhaps a little bit more interesting with some photographs and so on. And often myself, I find it easier to have something in front of me that I can look at as opposed to starting from scratch. And so how staff have envisioned this happening is that the bylaw would be adopted and staff can now go away. We've got the tools to work on things. If there was a dispute or a concern about the bylaw, then we could say, yeah, no problem. Council's going to be revisiting this in, I suggested November, and we will take your concern to them at that time. We would compile those sort of comments along with staff's input, and then however council wished to engage the public and say, what do you see? What do you envision? These are some of the points that are some of the key points that stand out to council in this bylaw, and collect those as well. And then staff would report back again in November and say, okay, here's what we have heard. What would you like to see in an amending bylaw? And we would amend that. And the other benefit that would do is that we're not without a bylaw until that happens, because things change. COVID happens. If it didn't happen in November and it happened in January instead, no problem. We're not sitting around waiting for a bylaw. We've got one. And if there's any disputes of them, on them, then they just need to wait until the bylaw comes back. Or conversely, we could bring it back earlier. The hazard tree process, no, there is no fee attached with that. And Michelle did a great job on a flow chart, and I meant to include it and I forgot. So I can send that out later. And it's very simple, very basic, that just takes you through the bylaw. When is it required? When is it not required? The fee schedule, no, the fee schedule goes into our rates, fees, and charges bylaw. And we didn't want to make reference to a tree bylaw. If council hadn't adopted the tree bylaw, we need to run them in parallel. And so I need council's take on where they want to go with the bylaw now, or committee's take. And then if it is, yes, we're behind you, then we would also bring in the fees and charges at the same time for next meeting, for next council meeting after this one, I suppose. And so the rates, fees, and charges bylaw will get adopted or get amended as well. And we do regular amendments on that one. So we don't have fees and charges in separate bylaws. We have them all collected in one. We hear you about those edits. We'll have a look at those, the specimen tree, significant tree, and the one typo there.
Thank you, Dave. Mr. Newman, Mayor Beamish.
Just a couple of points right now. First one is I'm a little bit concerned with adopting a bylaw in advance of consultation. I think it's a significant bylaw, a bold bylaw, as Councillor Andrade says, and people may see that as kind of an infringement. And what I was wondering, though, because I think the counter to that is that it's being a bylaw of this nature. Once it gets out there that the process has begun, or the process is putting a tree bylaw in place, is you run the risk of losing trees in the interim. And so the option, I think, could be a bylaw that prohibits the cutting of any tree in the town of Gibsons for a period of time, until such time to enable the consultation to go forward. And that would then, and obviously there would have to be exceptions to that for safety trees and stuff like that, dangerous trees, but it would just freeze what we have now, and then go through the consultation process. And maybe even if we say that the bylaw would either be rescinded upon adoption of the tree bylaw, and so that it would go through in that way. And that way we protect what we have, at the same time as that we show a purposeful intent of moving forward with the tree bylaw. And I believe we can do that. And it's something we might want to have a quick consultation with our lawyers on, but I believe that we could do just a straight prohibition, allowing for some exceptions. The other point I had is on the wider roads. I guess I would rather see options in there, because, as you know, wide roads are not necessarily neighborhood friendly. They don't encourage people to get together with their neighbors. And Glassford being an example, it's a very wide road as we can see going down there. But having a 10-meter lane right away in the back of properties for the purpose of trees could be an option. So that instead of widening the road in the front, we actually have a tree corridor at the backs of properties. Not a road corridor, but a tree corridor. And that's where maybe some significant trees could be added, as well as adding street trees within the existing 20-meter right away. So I think that's something you might want to consider. And it would accomplish the same thing, but the wider right away would, I think, be a significant in our community. I mean, I can stand on my front porch and I can talk to the people kitty corner to us, which we often do relative to the celebration for the first responders and stuff like that's been going on. So we're all out there sharing. We can see each other, we can wave to each other, we can talk to each other. And just by being on our front porches, even though they are kitty corner across an intersection. So something to think about. So, but thank you, Michelle and Dave, for bringing this forward. It's been a lot of work. I can see that a lot of thought has gone into this, and I really appreciate that. And I really appreciate you've acknowledged Councillor Crowell's initiative as well. So thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone else have?
Do you want me to comment on that, or do you want me to wait, Chair?
Well, if you wouldn't mind waiting, Mayor Bush made some good comments, but if we could maybe just hear from some others first. Does anyone else have any other comments to add? I've already heard from you too. Everybody else. Okay, Councillor Lumley.
Yeah, again, echoing, I thought it was an awesome report. Dave, you mentioned clear cutting by developers. And it's kind of funny that like even the forest industry is ahead of maybe a lot of communities. In fact, like they have to, like there's no more clear cutting. They have to leave a certain amount, certain type of trees when they do some cutting. How is this going to directly affect that? I mean, even the fact of timing, like when developers like clear cut land, they seem to do it like so far ahead of even putting a shovel in the ground. I just wondered how this ties into that, the new bylaw.
It would allow that to proceed in, I suppose, more of a thoughtful manner. For instance, with Gospel Rock, they came up with a plan for the roads, and they initially just cut the roads through and minimized that. And so if we, for instance, if we did consider those wider right-of-ways, and I hear what Mayor Beamish is saying as well, is that they would have cleared 20 meters of a 25-meter road dedication, and the additional 5 meters, any significant trees would have been left. Then we would have gone out there and looked at the lots and said, identified any significant trees that could be remain on bits of land that would be vacant. Instead, now we've got a development that is going to be planting trees again that aren't native to the area, and they've removed a whole mess of trees that some of which could have remained, obviously not all. And the list of protected trees, we're not looking to, if somebody has a lot, treed lot that is built or single family size, we're not going to say, no, you can't build your house. It is just identifying the building footprint and making sure that no more trees except those to be cleared for the construction are to be taken out. It doesn't mean that alders couldn't be removed. It's just the protected trees that we're after. And if there was a prohibition on tree cutting overall, that would be challenging with development right now, because yeah, where to draw that line, I suppose. Yeah, I'd like to comment on that a little bit more, but I want to make sure that everyone's obviously had a chance to talk and that the chair is comfortable with the time. Also in regards to the communication, that's easily something that Elizabeth would sink her teeth into and suggest how we would engage the public and what our objectives are. That this bylaw, in fact, is you could call it a trial bylaw, and that we want to hear what people think about it. And anyway, I'll pass it back to you. Thank you.
Yeah, Councillor Crowell.
Thank you, Chair. I sort of, I certainly agree with Mayor Beamish's concern that, the fact that this bylaw is on our agenda, is alerting a lot of people that, hey, it's on the radar. So, anyone who is likely thinking of maybe doing something is going to perhaps accelerate that. So, a temporary bylaw until this can receive, public input would be great. I think, procedurally, if we do first and second reading, then it can go to public hearing. So I would certainly be in favor of, it having those two readings to get it to the point that it could go to public hearing. I also wanted to acknowledge that Peter Crowell, who's one of the founders of the Healing Forest Project, is in the audience. So if anyone had any questions, he might be willing to enlighten us.
Thank you, Councillor Crowell. Councillor Deone, you had another comment.
Thank you. Actually, it's a question. I think I still don't understand if I have a dead tree, do I have to go through the whole application requirements, which is quite detailed, providing, I don't know, even it's a picture, or do we need to engage an arborist? And so I just have a better sense until it's declared is a hazard, and therefore I don't need a permit and don't need to pay a fee.
Yeah, well, there are some provisions in that bylaw for myself saying, yes, it's a dangerous tree, it can get removed. We don't need an arborist. It's fairly obvious. It's, damage during a windstorm, it's leaning, it's whatever. And streamlining that process. There may be something where somebody wants it to be deemed a hazard tree, or perhaps there are features of that tree that just like we were talking about on O'Shea Road, where we had some people saying, yes, they're dangerous trees, and another arborist, the town's arborist, saying they weren't. In questions like that, we would get an arborist involved.
But is still not clear to me. I do have a dead tree in the house. I want to know.
Yeah, it would be a streamlined permit process.
Okay, so is it something you download from the website? And why do I provide
Yeah, we would. One thing we don't do with bylaws is we don't put forms in bylaws, because as we work with forms, we don't want to have to go back to council and go, we want to add a $sign here or add in another line for something. So we do that on a staff level. So that would be on the website, and it would be I totally with you that we want to make this as reasonable as possible. We do not want to make it cumbersome. We don't want to put regulations in place that make people want to avoid them. And so we need to make sure that we're, as I say, we're streamlining that as best we can. And I would, I think that it would warrant a site or a page on our website on what the trees do, why we preserve them, and break down the bylaw into very simple language.
And perhaps another thing that I noticed, because there's some invasive species that they can become tree-like, for example, English holly, and they can be over 20 centimeters DBH. So in this case, the bylaw is saying if I cut, I'll have to replace it, but it's an invasive species. So perhaps there's a clause in the bylaw that says when is this invasive species, and then whether do I need a permit?
Mm-hmm. Good idea.
Yeah.
Yep. And those, if they are, if they're relatively minor changes, those can easily be done, as you're going through the readings of the bylaw. So I appreciate the thoughts and the feedback. Thank you.
I have just a few comments myself. I was wondering if you could elaborate on, if I read correctly, developers, this doesn't apply to developments where the land has got a development permit on it.
The development permit regulations would apply to
Right.
that. Yeah, so we just need to make sure that, and we have engaged planning on this as well. I'm not sure, I think the director of planning is here as well, so she may want to speak on that further. But the DP areas kind of would trump the tree bylaw, really.
So, but what I'm wondering is would we be asking developers before they get their development permit to do an inventory on their land to figure out how many trees they're about to mow down for their development? And then are they required to contribute $300 per tree to this tree preservation fund? Or like, how does it work from a developer standpoint?
It would be working in a manner that you're suggesting there. When we're talking about development, sorry, when I'm talking about development permits, we're talking about 1 and 2, so geotechnical or environmental. So not like a form, not the other, I don't know, 8, 10, 12 we have about form and character and so on. So those development permits are one item, and then any reports from the development community, whether it's those developments or a landscape plan, they would have to be incorporating the recommendation or the requirements in the tree bylaw. Right, so they would have to consider what is written in the tree bylaw about what are, for instance, what our protected species are, and whether replacement trees are required, and yeah.
Okay, so then it probably would play out kind of how I described it. They would probably have to do an inventory on their land before they cleared it. And then they would, I mean, presumably they're going to have to be able to cut down trees because.
Yes, absolutely. And we're not looking to stop that.
Yeah.
Any more than we are on a single family. We recognize that, yes, absolutely, trees have to come down if we're expecting to continue developing in the town. Fortunately, actually, most of that development isn't in our heavily treed areas. Those are largely under town jurisdiction now.
Right.
Lost the opportunity, I guess.
So sorry, Councillor Lumley, last comment. I noticed view preservation doesn't come up in the bylaw, and I'm just playing devil's advocate here. Looking at the replacement schedule for, if you cut down a tree of a certain size, you have to put up 2 to 3 to replace it.
Yeah.
I don't know, I could just see a lot of people concerned about their views. And I'll just leave it at that. Anyways, just a comment for now. Councillor Lumley.
Yeah, I was just wanting to follow up on Councillor Deondrati's point about streamlining processes for dangerous trees. That was one of the thoughts I had, is that if they have to go through this process, I was thinking to myself, if it's not streamlined or it's not really easy, if someone says, well, before I could have just hired an arborist and had somebody fall this dangerous tree, and while I'm waiting for the town to process my paperwork, the tree falls on my house or my shed. I'm just wondering if it sets us up for any liability, or if there should be a separate part of the bylaw that says, like, if they have a dangerous tree, they could actually they could go through this process on their own and then submit a report to the town from a qualified arborist or a professional saying, yes, this tree did have to come down. That was just liability was one of the points that I was thinking of.
That's a good thought. Thank you.
Okay, folks, I just want to stay cognizant of time. We are halfway through our allotted time for this meeting. We do have a number of recommendations from staff. I'll just walk through them. I know we're going to have to talk about how we proceed from here. But anyways, we have a recommendation that the tree preservation bylaw number 1282 2020 be given first reading and second reading. Do we support that here today to have council support that? Councillor D'Andrade, that's a yes, or?
No, actually, if I may make a comment, this is a serious bylaw, and here we are rushing. And because we have a timeline, actually, this is a good example of something that should have been, for example, brought to an environmental committee where people have enough time and ability or willingness to debate to the extent, and then we will bring for a quick. So I'm still not clear of the point that Mayor Beamish made. I agree with him. My concern is a bylaw comes and then we would get consultation. But what happens if someone already cut a tree and the town now goes and there's a fine? So I think it's important that we be clear. Are we putting a moratorium? I'll make a motion if that's the case. Right? Are we putting a moratorium or we don't want a moratorium? What's the process? I think this has to be clear. And what's the communication strategy? Because I think there's two issues. One thing is to introduce the bylaw to the people. We don't have, I mean, our bylaw, let's say it's weak or whatever is the detail, is the terminology, but we don't have a tree bylaw applicable to every private property. So we can say overall we don't have. So that will be introduced. This is something communicated to the public. And another thing is to get feedback with the public, which is we have also to give the impression, we don't want to give the impression that some things are negotiable. Perhaps certain things are negotiable, but we have a purpose before. And I think this is not clear yet what we are doing. To me, there are two kinds of communications here, right? I mean, one is engagement and the other is a consultation. And I think we have the committee has to be clear to make a clear recommendation to council.
Okay, so just on that, before I go to you, Mayor Beamish, to staff, what is the feasibility of putting a temporary moratorium on tree cutting in town? What is the process for that? How feasible is that?
I'll defer to Manny on this, but I'll make a couple of comments first. One is you put a bylaw in place and say you can't cut a tree in the town for a period of 6 months, and you pass the bylaw just the same as a bylaw with this, and then at the end of 6 months you rescind it and put a bylaw in place.
In doing so, however, we basically said you can't develop anything for 6 months.
That's my concern with, and I totally understand that sending this or moving a significant bylaw through quickly, that you don't want to send the wrong message. And I think that we would, if we did that, if council was to do that, that we would have to put a clear communication behind that. So my concern with the moratorium is that it becomes, we can say no tree cutting on town land, but we can do that anyway. Mm-hmm. So I'm a little bit concerned about how to actually administer that. And I'm not trying to beat a dead horse here, so don't get me wrong, but with adopting, if you were to adopt this bylaw with the clear message that this bylaw is being adopted on a trial basis and for community input, then staff would be able to have the tools to be able to allow development to continue, whether it's the construction of a single family house or a lot that's going to get clear cut for a larger development. We would have those tools, and in fact, you'd be able to do more than you would by putting a moratorium on because this could apply to somebody who just wants to build a single family home. But the key part of this, of course, would be messaging behind it, saying, we want to have something put in place because we haven't for the past year, and this is what has been the outcome. We wish to engage the community on this, and this bylaw is going in as we could even say a temporary measure until we've engaged the community, and it will give staff the tools to be able to continue to allow tree cutting without the fear or danger or what have you of a developer cutting down all his trees this summer because he knows that a bylaw is coming.
Yeah, and it is not much different than putting in a moratorium right now today, saying you can't.
Well, it's actually, in my opinion, it's a little bit better because you are actually allowing it to proceed under the, and I'm talking about this from a staff perspective, not political. So that's all I'm talking about here. For staff, we actually have a way to administer or regulate the tree cutting. And we can have that message that this is a trial bylaw, and council wants to hear what the experiences has been on the ground with it.
Okay, thank you, Dave.
And I do have the flow chart on my screen if you felt like it.
Okay, Mayor Beamish.
Yeah, I guess I'm not familiar with the concept of a trial bylaw. That's all. I understand the process. Because if people are caught under the trial bylaw and it's changes in the future, they might have their noses out of joint and say, well, geez, we tried to do that and they didn't allow us to do it, sort of thing, but now you've amended the bylaw to allow it. I think you could put a moratorium in place in the context of requiring people to still require a permit for tree cutting and work within a general process of okay, we're not going to say no trees, but what we're saying is that we are in the process of adopting this bylaw. We want to come and talk to you about the next tree you plan to cut, and we'll give you a permit for that purpose if necessary. But I think that in the context of because of the scope of this, and because of the detail of this, I mean, it's a great bylaw. There's a lot in here in terms, including tree species and a whole bunch of other things. It really is good, and I would like to see it go ahead. But I don't like to see us simply impose it without the consultation to the community. And I think that the option there of saying, okay, this is what we're working on, and in the meantime, we are going to impose a moratorium on tree cutting with the following exceptions, and there are exemptions right in here, sort of thing, that in the bylaw itself and the process. And we just really, during this period of time, we're not saying nothing, everything will stop. We want to talk to you about it, and I think wording to that effect could be put into a bylaw. So,
okay. CAO.
Thank you, Chair. I would just, I think as you can see the bylaw, most of the work went into the technical aspects of the bylaw, which is certainly, from my perspective, is where our priority was. Going forward, the education part is very important, and the consultation, as Councillor Deone pointed out, is a very different things. I think we can do a lot of work, ban or no ban, on that regardless. I think just the idea that we're seeking feedback, I think hopefully will encourage people to be meaningful in their feedback, so that when we come back later in the fall or whenever you think it's appropriate, then I think there's room to refine this. I think there's different audiences in terms of the development community, for example, even the whole community of tree cutters and arborists and so on, just engaging with those folks alone. I think they could be some of our best partners out there, the greenhouses and so on. So we still have quite a bit of work to do. But from my perspective, I don't want to ideally not spend too much of our efforts on a bylaw for a few months when we have a bylaw over the long term that still needs a bunch of accompanying work as well. It's just a couple of comments there.
All right, Mr. Newman, and then we really need to make a decision, folks, or we need to start moving this forward.
And just a clarification, Mayor Beamish, I'm not suggesting we put forward as a trial bylaw. I know I use that language. It's more putting forward a bylaw, recognizing that after public input that we would be able to amend that bylaw. So certainly not advertise it as a temporary or trial bylaw.
thank you.
Mr. Newman, if we were to put this forward for second reading, how long would we have until third reading?
That's a question for the corporate officer, I believe.
Hi, sorry.
Whoa.
Oh.
I want to get those. I want to get those sound effects. Makes me sound much more imposing.
Let's try this one instead. Sorry, I'm having some issues with my network connection. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, perfect. The waiting period between first, second, third reading and adoption is a meeting unless there are other legislative requirements. So unless we have to send it to the ministry for approval, or if it requires a public hearing. So those are the dependencies of the bylaw, but really it just needs to be a day apart, those readings.
I think it was how long can we leave it, not how short.
Oh, you can leave it as long as you want. Unfortunately, there are many orphan bylaws on the books that have never received adoption after first, second, and third reading.
Councillor Ladd was going to sleep.
Can you guys hear me? I lost, everything went blank there for a few minutes, so I lost the last little bit. But you were saying that we could go as long as we wanted. It's up to us, essentially.
Yeah, it's up to you.
Okay, so I mean, I'm just playing devil's advocate here, but if we were to recommend first and second reading, in theory, could we not, and I will get to you to Councillor Crowell in a sec, could we not be engaging with the public and our stakeholders before third reading?
Oh yeah.
Yep.
Yes.
Why? What's?
Well, it would sit for it doesn't freeze anything that's happening in the community. So
No.
that if third reading was in November, then it doesn't put a freeze on things.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I mean, we could pass first and second reading. This is just something that I've done in my other life, in my other job, where we just simply communicate to the public that we are asking for voluntary support of this process as we move forward, and to be conscious of their actions. And it puts a bit of public community social pressure on people to do the right thing. And so that if all of a sudden you see somebody mowing down their piece of land, the community gets on their case a little bit. So asking for voluntary avoidance or support of an initiative as it's moving forward is another way of approaching it while we go through the consultation process. Councillor Crowell, then Councillor Lumley, and then we need to decide what we're doing
Thank
here.
you, Chair. Something that I'd recommend, I certainly agree with, that there needs to be public input and consultation with the community. And, I think we've got a really good working document here that, we can go to the people with something that can be fine tuned. What I would like to see is, I noticed on our town website, we've just announced that we've received funding for some financial support for the White Tower Pond project. I would like to see the healing forest tied into that, and not necessarily a bylaw that could get hung up for the next 6 months. I think people are looking for some good news for a change, and I think the White Tower Pond project and a healing forest project announcement would be a great morale boost to the community. And I would hate to see it get tied up in a bylaw that could take an unknown period to resolve. And I'm sure we're going to be making the announcement of the funding for the White Tower Pond project. It's already on our website. So I think it gives us a unique opportunity to be the bearers of some good news for a change.
Councillor Lumley.
I think the mayor should move these 3 recommendations and a moratorium on tree cutting, and then people will know that we're seriously looking at a bylaw, a comprehensive bylaw, and we also don't want anybody to take advantage of the fact we're in the midst of creating or trying to, as best we can, perfect this bylaw. So not that this is going to sit on the books forever. I think we're going to obviously work towards completing it, but let's just put a moratorium, like number 4, a moratorium on until we have public consultation and we have third reading, something like that. So that's my suggestion.
I like it.
Yeah, I'd be fine. I'd be fine.
Going to be a final comment. I really do need to move forward. So Councillor Deone, last comment, please.
I agree. And with the educational campaign, introducing the bylaw, we can talk that procedures will be in place for any developer, the same way that the bylaw will look at case by case, but at least we avoid if the consultation and all this process goes another 3 months that people don't clear in between. So I think it's a good strategy to put a moratorium. And now we are looking at the bylaw, get feedback, and also doesn't give the impression that we are putting a bylaw and then we're gonna go back because some people scream louder and then we're gonna fix the bylaw. I think it's
just recognize if there's people out there with a building permit right now and they're ready to break ground and they've got an excavator lined up, they are going to be so choked. Like now they're put on hold for 3 months.
Would it be possible to have a process for these people? That's what I'm saying. A moratorium will be look at case by case.
To come in and
yeah.
Okay, Mayor Beamish, you've been someone's put a motion there for you. Do you want to? How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I'm comfortable with that. Giving it first and second. I mean, one thing that is missing in here, and we got maybe a 3 and a 4 and a 5, and one is the coming up with the communications plan is necessary, and we need to do that. I don't mind the idea of a public hearing on it, and we can do that. We don't have to do it for this bylaw, but it's a good way to do that. Set a public hearing date and give people a chance to look at it, and that would move it forward right after that public hearing date. So that could be September or something. Public hearing in September, and let people a chance to look at it, and the and then part of our communication strategy with it. But I do really feel that before we do adoption of the bylaw, we need to have the consultation.
Absolutely.
So that's where we are. That's where I am with it. And and Councillor Lumley, I want to tell you, while we've been sitting here, I've counted every tree in your backyard, and I'll be looking for those same trees next time we talk.
So are you moving then these recommendations? Do I need to read them out and then?
Well, I'll move them, and I'll move them in the context that we add in it that staff consider public consultation process, as well as council impose a moratorium on tree cutting within the. I'd even go so far as to say that council encourage the community to follow the principles of the bylaw and work with staff to follow the principles of the bylaw until adoption, and as opposed to even putting a moratorium, because I appreciate people are out there, but developers are going to come in, they're going to work with staff, they're going to work with the planning department, and the planning department is going to have this and say, well, look, we're really, this is where we were going with this. Can we work with you around these terms in the short term? And I think that would be a way to do that, perhaps, as opposed to saying cut nothing, but knowing full well that third reading and final adoption are only 2 days away. If council felt the need to go there.
Well, that's what I was referring to about voluntary compliance. There's community, sort of pressure to do the right thing in these searches.
So number 4 would be a consultation plan up to and including a public hearing if necessary. And number 5 would be encourage voluntary compliance for the community until the bylaw is adopted.
Perfect. Does somebody want to second that? Councillor Crowell is seconding that. Is there any further comment? And corporate officer, do I need to read these out, or do you have that?
No, that was pretty clear. So you can go ahead.
All right. All in favor? Everyone in favor? Yay, good work, everybody. I didn't know if we were going to get that done. That was great. Okay, good.
Yeah, thanks, Dave and Michelle. That was really good.
Yeah, thank you to both of you. That was excellent.
If I could just ask the chair, do you want me around for the rest of the meeting, or are you content with me going out? Because I don't have access to the agenda right now.
No, I think the next one's Director of Planning, correct? If I remember correctly.
Step code.
Okay, so if that's all, then I'll duck out.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks, Michelle. Bye.
Thank you.
Yes, Councillor Crowell,
Um,
you're muted.
I had a question for Mr. Newman. The flyover he referred to, which would give us basically what's currently on the table tree-wise over the town. I just wanted to find out how soon that could be done.
Okay, well,
We're
hopefully,
getting quotes at the moment for that, and to see whether it costs in coordinating with the original district and Seashell or looking at something similar.
Thank you.
great. All right, moving on to our next report on the Energy Step Code survey results from the Director of Planning.
Thank you, Chair Ludwig. So in February, Council directed staff to proceed with a regionally coordinated public consultation process to receive input from the community on implementing the Energy Step Code. So staff worked together with the District of Seashell, the Sunshine Coast Regional District, and the Seashell Indian Government District to prepare the survey. The survey launched mid-May and was open for 6 weeks. It was promoted through each local government website, through social media posts, and targeted emails to the building industry from all local governments. A total of 48 responses were received. The staff report says 45, sorry for the typo. And the intent of the survey was to gain insight into how the implementation of the STEP code might affect the building industry and how local governments can support the industry during the implementation. So at a high level, the feedback was generally supportive and positive towards the implementation of the STEP code. And most people who completed the survey were aware of the STEP code and quite knowledgeable. 88% of the respondents supported the provincial implementation, which would be for Part 9 buildings. So like smaller buildings would be Step 3 for 2022. And then for larger buildings, Part 3 buildings would be Step 2 for 2022. 60% supported the Sunshine Coast implementation. And of that, 21% was neutral and 16% opposed it. The most common challenges that people commented on are the increase in costs to build, the increased time to build, which is also a cost, the lack of knowledge in trades, such as local energy advisors on the Sunshine Coast, and the impacts to the building aesthetics. To support the implementation, people asked for information about local resources, training sessions, and public information meetings. There was also support for a coast-wide implementation at the same pace for consistency among all Sunshine Coast local governments. So therefore, the recommendation is to proceed, the staff recommendation is to proceed with the implementation of the STEP code for Step 1 for all Part 9 and Part 3 buildings, and aiming for an implementation date of January 1st, 2021. So initially we had hoped to implement in the fall to give a little bit more than a year for the building industry to get used to Step 1. But now we're thinking January 1st, 2021 is a better timeline to get, to ensure sufficient time for other local governments to get their reports to councils and boards. And then implement it consistently together, and then also prepare a communication strategy for that implementation. So should the PDC and council support this recommendation, the next step would be to bring back a building bylaw, an updated building bylaw with step code requirements for the 4 readings, not all at once. And then a communication strategy as well to launch the implementation. Thank you.
Director of Planning. Okay, can I get a motion to receive the report, please? Councillor Crowell, Councillor Deone, all in favor? Thank you. Open for discussion. All right, yay, Cliff jumps in.
Yeah, I mean, I'll go first. My work touches on this, and I think only once again voice my wholehearted support for this. I definitely think we should do it immediately. I don't really have any other comment than to say let's please move forward.
Thank you. I have a question if no one else is jumping in. Oh, Councillor or Mayor Beamish.
No, I'd just like to hear Cliff's experience with it in terms of how it is received and implemented, and what the attitudes are.
Yeah, I mean, the challenges that were cited in the survey are certainly very real. For example, we're sort of consulting right now on a house in North Vancouver, and because it's a very big house, you know, they've got a lot of consultants involved, and you know, the energy analysis we got back was kind of not really good. So there's definitely a lack of people doing this job sort of very well at the moment, but you know, that will only improve by having it as a requirement, and people will have to get better at the work. So I certainly think those are valid things to point out, but the only way that this is going to get better is having this code implemented. I hope that answers the question you had.
Thank you.
Councillor Lumley.
I want to know if Clifford was offended by the comment that there's not enough knowledgeable people on the coast.
No, I in fact agree. I mean, I've considered maybe expanding my knowledge base to get into this work, but I mean, I'm certainly not knowledgeable enough about it right now either, and it's something we struggle with even in our firm. So it's absolutely true, but you know, it's going to force us to get better, right?
That's a great segue into my question, if I just could, before we carry on. I tried to go online to Google what step, so we're talking about going to step 1 here today. What does step 1 entail? I went online to get a better understanding of it, but it wasn't clear to me.
Yeah, so step 1 would entail a test. Basically, an energy advisor would have to come and do a blower door test and get the rate that is achieved. Step 2 and step 3 have higher target rates. So essentially, people are building to step 1 right now without that blower door test, without getting that energy advisor on site to test the rate that is achieved in the building. So it adds the energy advisor component and that testing. And what it does is it also helps people learn how they're building, what rate they're building to, so that when in 2022, when people have to build to step 2 and step 3, they'll be learning through the year how to improve their energy efficiencies.
Okay, thank you. Scott.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, no, just to put a finer point on that, and maybe in more layman's terms, that's easier to understand than what a door blower test does. It measures the air changes that a building has. So, for example, a hospital, it requires very fresh, clean air constantly. It requires 20 air changes per hour. So that means the entire air inside of a building needs to be refreshed 20 times. In a house, the step code requires an air change of 3.5 and under. So 3.5 air changes per hour and under. And when they do a door blower test, what they do is you close all the windows, and then you pressurize the house with a fan. That way it forces the air inside of the house, and or rather outside of the house. And then you can go around and feel all the cracks where the air is leaking into your house, basically. So you can put your hand over an outlet, and you can literally feel air coming through a power outlet in your house. And so building to reduce those air changes are difficult, because you've got to seal effectively every little opening in your building envelope, be it a light switch or electrical box or all of your pot lights in like a cathedral ceiling. So that's why it becomes difficult, because you end up adding lots of bits of sticky tape all over your building to make it less leaky for air.
Okay, thank you very much. Do other people have comments on this? Okay, Councillor Crowell, I think you had your hand up before.
Chair. I will admit I was a little dismayed at how few people engaged in the survey. Like, you know, it was put out there, you know, to a community of 35,000 people, and, you know, 48 people, whatever, you know, it's a little disheartening, because, you know, ultimately it is going to impact everyone. You know, I know it's on the radar at the regional district, and the other big thing that everyone's looking for is consistency across the coast. that, it's, what we adopt is going to be translated to the district, is going to be translated to the district of Sechelt. So, I certainly rely on staff that, we stay in step with everyone else. And, it's a learning process. So once these bylaws and building code changes are made, everyone's going to start playing with the same deck of cards, which I think is going to make it better for everyone. And, it's going to affect costs, but there's other cost savings involved over the long term. So, hopefully it'll balance out.
Hopefully. Councillor D'Andrade? No? Okay. Mayor Beamish.
I'll move the recommendations.
All right.
Good report. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much. That's seconded by Councillor Crowell. All in favor? Excellent. Well, that was a lot easier than the first. Great. Thanks, Director of Planning.
Just Sheriff, a question to corporate officer. Will we see these recommendations come forward tonight, or are they going to come forward next week?
That's what I was just breaking in to say. We didn't include it, but the recommendations from the previous report for the tree bylaw, it would be great if council could move those to the council meeting tonight. And then the step code, they can go to, we're planning another plan and development. There will be one on hopefully the 28th. So it's council's choice whether they want to move those forward tonight or to the 28th.
Yeah. I would like to see the tree bylaw go forward for sure and get that one moving forward. Yeah.
Okay, so are you, do we have to make a motion for that, or do?
Please.
Okay, so moved by Mayor Beamish, seconded by Councillor D'Andrade, all in favor. Is that a question, Councillor Lumley, or is that your in support? Okay, so that moves to tonight then. Okay, thank you. Okay, moving on then to inquiries. Do we have any inquiries in the audience?
Sorry, that's me too. At this point, I'll ask anybody who's in the meeting as an attendee to please raise your hand. The raise hand features at the bottom of your screen, and I'll turn on your audio and video. And I'm not seeing anyone, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Okay, well, that wraps up our meeting then. The next regular Planning and Development Committee meeting is going to be on the 28th now, not September 1st. Is that correct? Over to you, Corporate Officer again.
Sorry, it's still to be determined, but if it was called, it would be a special meeting on the 28th.
Okay.
So the next regular meeting will be the one that's noted.
Okay, which is September 1st of 2020. Okay, that's it. Motion to adjourn. Councillor D'Andrade, Mayor Beamish, all in favor? Okay, thanks everyone. Thanks, Cliff. Thanks, Scott.
Thank you. See you guys later.
Okay, bye.
Bye.